Hi everybody, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today is election day here in the United States, and so I thought it was appropriate that we talk about electoral rolls and voter registration and how to use them in your family history research. We're going to start by talking about where to find them, then I'll walk you through several examples of some of these types of records and wrap up with exactly what they're going to do for your family history research. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. First, let's cover how to find them. Like everything on Ancestry, the quickest, easiest way to find them is through my favorite resource on our site, which is the card catalog. In that title field in the card catalog, you have a couple of options. You can type in the word voter, because here in the United States, those records are typically called voter registrations, or you can type in the word electoral. Outside of the United States, these particular kinds of records are typically called electoral registers or electoral rolls. So let me just show you what that looks like. Here on the site, if you click on search and then scroll down and click on card catalog. When the card catalog comes up, in the title field again, you just type in the word electoral, and you'll notice here that most of the records that come up are going to be for outside of the United States. They're either going to be called electoral rolls or electoral registers, or you can type in the word voter, and you'll notice that most of the records that come up for the word voter are for those inside of the United States. Now that's just kind of a general guideline, that is not an absolute, but those two words should get you access to almost all of this type of record on the site that you need. Now, let's look at a few examples. We're going to scroll down here to the state of Arizona. Arizona voter registrations run from 1866 through 1955. That are available here on this site. Now, one of the reasons why voter registrations are an important record type is because they help us fill in the gaps in between census years. So censuses here in the United States and most everywhere in the world are done every 10 years. In the US, they're done on the 10s, but the 1890 census was destroyed. So we have a 20-year gap between 1880 and 1900. And one of the things that we find is that sometimes people get lost in the little gaps or in that big gap. So voter registrations will help fill in some of those gaps in between the census years. They also have a lot of really, really rich information on them in some cases. Even when there's sparse information, they're useful. We'll get to that, but in some cases, they have some really great information. So we're going to pull up a voter registration for this particular relative of mine. This is for the year 1884. So again, we're in that gap between the 1880 and the 1900 census. So we can start to fill in some of his movements. Where was he living? How old was he? And you'll see these records in particular are handwritten, and they have some really great information. If we zoom in here a little bit, you can see that there's a registration number, the name of the individual who is registering, their age, and it gives a specific age. In some cases, voter registrations will just say of age, because you need to be over a certain legal age in order to vote in most countries, and that age has changed over time. In some places it was 24, 26, 28, 32, 21, 18. It just depends on the time and the place and the laws in that particular time and place. In this case, it gives a specific age. These records also happen to give the specific country of birth or of nativity. So you can see if they were born in the US or if they were born in Ireland or elsewhere in the United States or elsewhere in the world. The occupation is listed, which is fantastic. One of the things that voter registration can do for us is it can help us differentiate between individuals of the same name living in the same place. And occupation is one of those key pieces of identifying information that helps us sort out people of the same name. It'll give the local residence or the town in the county where they are living. Then there is an entire section here on naturalization. So as you noticed, a lot of the individuals in this particular community were born in Ireland, and so this will list the date of naturalization, the place they were naturalized, and what type of court they were naturalized in. This becomes really important if you are looking for naturalization documentation. Naturalization documentation, of course, is going to list date and place of birth. It will list the date, the port, and the ship sometimes that they came over on. It'll have really detailed information about who was naturalized under them. So, for example, if you scroll down here, I believe, must have been on another record I was looking at this morning, children under 18 and women prior to the 1920s were naturalized under the head of household. And so sometimes you'll see the words naturalized under father, and so you'll get some indication that they came to the United States before they were 18, that their father was naturalized. And then there is date of registration information. And then there's a column for cancellation of registration. Now, typically, registration is canceled because somebody moves out of the county. So again, that's going to be an indicator for you of additional information available that they might have moved in between those census years. Here's that record that says by naturalization of father. That's something you can look for. I was looking for a cancellation. Doesn't seem to be any on these pages, but that's an indication that somebody has moved out of the county, and so they have canceled their local registration. So that's an example of a voter registration image out of the state of Arizona. The next thing I want to look at is what we call these Russia Duma voter lists. These are for just a specific period of time, but I wanted to point these ones out because, for a couple of reasons. One is, anytime you get on a database on Ancestry, always, always, always scroll down past that search box and you will see a database description. That database description very often has really rich history and context that helps you understand the records that you're looking at. In this case, the Russian Duma lists were created because the Tsar was, well, he was forced to, but he was creating a parliament called the Duma. And so this is Russia's first opportunity for a democratic election. And if you scroll down, it will give you information about who was eligible to vote in that particular election. So you'll see that it's based on age, which means everybody in here will be a male, 24 years or older. It's also based on some kind of criteria that makes them eligible. They have to have paid taxes, they have to be a property owner, they have to be a member of a guild or a professional organization. So there's different criteria that made them eligible to vote, and they have to have met some of that criteria. So this has lots of really great information about the particular regions. Always read the database descriptions. They will give you lots of really great information. But these particular records then, you'll notice, if I do a search here for a particular individual, are going to have some limited information. In this case, this is only an index because that's all that was provided to Ancestry. So there is no image to click through to. But you will see a couple of things. You're going to see the individual's name. You're going to see his patronym. Now, in a lot of countries, they didn't have surnames. In this case, this individual has a surname, but he also has a patronymic name, which means this is the name of his father. You'll see he's eligible to vote. It just says he's at least age 24. He could be 76. We don't know. We just know he's older than 24. This is the year he voted, the country, the district, and then here is the qualification for voting. In this case, this individual happens to be a landowner. It tells us the value of his property, and then it gives you a source for that original list. So if you want to actually order a copy from the archive of the original voter list and see if there's any additional information available on that, you can do so. So those are the Russian Duma lists. Let's look next at Texas. This particular collection of Texas voter registrations are really important for a very significant reason, which is that this is the first election in Texas, or election period in Texas, during which blacks were allowed to register to vote. And so this particular collection, if we look up here, Abraham Johnson, this particular collection will not only include information about where they're living and what's going on in their life, it will also include information about their race. Again, this is important to help differentiate individuals with the same name. You noticed I did a search for Abraham Johnson. There's 7 of them. 2 of them live in the very same, I thought 2 of them lived in the same county. I was misreading that. But you end up with people with the same names, sometimes in same or similar locations, about the same age. And so race is another way you can differentiate individuals on paper. The other reason I love these Texas lists is because it lists the state of birth, and it also lists information about the movement or the residence of the individual. So if we look here, again, we have a registration number, the date of registration, the name. We've got the county of residence, the precinct number, but then we have this 3-column time of residence list. So it says this individual has been in the state of Texas for 21 years. They have lived in this particular county, Madison County, for 12 of those years, and they have lived in this particular precinct, precinct 3, for 5 years. So now you start to build this timeline of this life of this individual, and it gives you gaps that you can fill in that lead you to additional research. The other thing about the Texas voter registrations, and really all genealogical records when you have images, is always check the next image. In this case, this was a full page, 2-page ledger, but they've been microfilmed individually, and then that's how Ancestry digitized them. In this case, the second image is the rest of the story. So we see here where they are a native of, in this case, what state or country this individual was born in. Then again, you see that naturalization information. We've got this individual born in Ireland who became a citizen by oath of amnesty, which is a little bit different than the typical process of naturalization, declaration of intent, and then naturalization. There's a clue here about why he got that. He was naturalized July 9th, 1865 in Appomattox. So it's very possible that this individual received his citizenship by right of the fact that he fought in the U.S. military during the U.S. Civil War. So you get, again, additional clues about who this individual is and what they were doing. There's a signature of the elector, and then over here under general remarks is where you are going to see if this individual is colored. And you'll see lots of different ways that that's listed or abbreviations for that. You'll also see some things like this individual has a notation that they're not yet 21 years old. So interesting, something to further investigate. Why is this individual being allowed to vote? This person held office, and so there's some information there about that. Something about being engaged in the rebellion. So remember, this is right after the Civil War. So lots of little remarks and notations that might lead you to more information about your ancestor, but remember to always check that second image. Okay, let's move on from that voter category to that electoral category. Remember, electoral is typically the word or phrase that is used outside of the United States. In this case, we're going to look at the Australian electoral rolls. Now, there are 103 million electoral records in this particular collection. This is important for a couple of reasons. One is Australia does a census every 10 years, just like many other countries, but Australia tabulates the data and then destroys the censuses for privacy reasons, which means there's no available censuses if you're doing research on family who is in Australia, from Australia, family of yours, descendants of your ancestors who may have left and gone to Australia that you're trying to track down. And so these electoral rolls become one of the only records available for tracking individuals in Australia. Now, one of the reasons that I love this particular collection has to do with women. So we're going to do a search on the surname Smith. It seems pretty broad. Down here in the keyword field, I'm also going to put in the name of a particular community. So what I'm looking for is somebody with the last name Smith, which you would think would be astronomically difficult to research without a first name especially. But I know a community where this particular individual happened to live. And so I can put that in the keyword there with some quotation marks around it, do a search, and you'll notice that I only come up with, relatively few when you consider that particular surname. Now, one of the things I want to point out here has to do with the women. This woman's name is Christine Hilda Abel Smith. But when I go to the image, what you're going to notice is I'm actually on the A's. This is the page for the A's. Well, that's because everybody is listed with their complete name. Women are listed with their surname. So in this case, her last name is Smith, but she is indexed under her maiden name, which is Abel. And so you can learn information about women's maiden names and their married names. So if you only know one or the other, this might lead you to that. Because people are listed with their entire name, including their middle name, it's going to make it a little bit easier to differentiate between individuals who are have the same name in the same place. Again, that middle name or middle initial becomes one of the identifying pieces of information that helps us sort people out. So really great resource there for information. There's also information here on this roll about their occupation. So you've got an address of where they live, the occupation, and then the gender indicator there. So great information available. One of the other things you want to do is pay attention to who's living in the same place. Oftentimes, people who are living in the same place are related, particularly if they live at the same address. But if they're living in the same town with an unusual name, or if you're trying to track groups of family members or find who are the parents of somebody, one of the methodologies for doing that is collect everybody with that surname in this specific location, and then try to see if some of these people don't lead you back to information that helps you connect the dots. So that is Australia. Next, we're going to look at the UK poll books. Now, these particular poll books, there's 4.5 million of them. They date back to 1538. That's one of the things that makes this particular collection amazing, is you get records that date back sometimes way before census records, way before consistent birth, marriage, and death registration. And so these records then become the evidence that you need to piece together families, to piece together the identity of individuals. If somebody is in a poll book or an electoral register in 1721, it may be the only available record about them, but that gives you enough information sometimes to know, well, they were of a particular age, right? They had to have been older than this. They were probably a property owner. In this case, most people were not able to register to vote until they were of a particular age. So if you scroll down again, you're going to see a database description. It's going to give you some really great information about the laws of the time, and then allow you to search those particular records. A little something about the UK poll books. First of all, there's a difference between a poll book and an electoral register. An electoral register is just a listing of those who are registered to vote. From 1538 until 1832, the only people allowed to vote were men who were freeholders, meaning they owned property. Starting in 1832, across the UK, registration to vote became compulsory, which means you have to register to vote or you will be fined. And so from 1832 until an enfranchisement bill was passed, men over the age, it was 24, then it became 21, then I believe it was lowered to 18. Men were required to register to vote. They didn't have to vote, they just had to register. And then women were allowed the vote for a period of time if they were over the age of, I believe it was 32, and then that age got lowered again in accordance until now. Everybody is required to vote and required to register and allowed to vote. Now, poll books are a little bit different. From 1538 until 1872, the actual vote was recorded and is made available, which I think is fascinating. From 1872 on to now, of course, it has become a secret ballot or a secret vote, and so nobody knows how you vote. But prior to that, it was actually published in these poll books, the sheriffs had access to it, and they could see who voted and who they voted for. Now, I'm sure that information was not always used for great purposes, but for genealogical purposes now it gives us a fascinating insight into who these individuals voted for, and it allows us to go maybe do a little bit more research into those individuals, into the politics of the time, and help us come to know our ancestors a little bit better. Okay, last couple of databases I want to look at. The next one is the Paris, France electoral rolls. Now these ones just happen to be for a particular specific place, but one of the things that I love about these rolls are that they give specific birth dates and places. So it doesn't matter where you registered to vote. I mean, that matters. That's what the information's about. But in addition to that, it also gives information about birthplace and date. So you can see here, we've got information about surname, given names, birthplace, birth date. Here there is the qualification, or what makes this individual eligible to vote, and then information about where they live. So these records, and there are many electoral rolls and voter registrations that get to this level of detail, have specific birth dates and specific birthplaces. Finally, I want to take a look at the Newcastle records. Newcastle upon Tyne, there's 10.2 million records in this single database. Again, they date back to 1741, and this is another example where this database description doesn't just give you information about this specific database, it gives you historical information and context about the laws of the time so that you can understand the records that you are looking at a little bit better. So there is information about military service, there is information about businesses and occupations, there is information about other qualifications for voting. In the case of women's suffrage, there is some additional information from 1928 on. They actually give codes that are, the key to those codes is here, that includes information about the women voters and some additional detail about who they are. They turned it into not just a registration, but also a little bit of a census, or a way of collecting data or information about the voting public that helped inform them in some of the laws that they continued to make and pass. So those are the voter registration records. I just went through a few of them just to give you an idea of what kind of things are available. Now, of course, every country, every state is going to handle it a little bit different. So you just have to dive into the time and place. Pay attention to that date range. So even if you find the location, make sure that the date range is right for when your family is there. Pay attention to those database descriptions so that you can learn about the laws of the time, understand who is eligible, who is not eligible. If you're in the right place in the right time and your ancestor is not in there, that is a piece of evidence as well. It's what we call negative evidence. They should be there, but they're not. That tells you something. It might tell you that they moved. It might tell you that they're not as old as you think they are. It might tell you that they passed away. So negative evidence serves a purpose in genealogy as well, but you have to understand the records that you're looking at so that you know if what you're seeing is really negative evidence or not. Let me just wrap up by just reiterating some of these reasons why we can use electoral rolls. It helps us learn about the political affiliation or the ways in which our ancestors voted. It helps us to track them in those non-census years. It helps us to track their movement. When did they move into that county? When did they register to vote in that location? Where had they been before that maybe? One of the tools you can use, or the methodologies you can use, is looking for others with the same surname registered in the same place. Start to track those individuals. Did they move to that place together? Well, they're probably going to be related in some way. Maybe researching one of those other individuals will lead to a record about your ancestor that will then help prove some of those relationships. Many electoral registers, at the very minimum, all electoral registers and voter registration will give you a minimum age for an individual, but can also give you more specific ages, sometimes down to the birth date and birthplace. Because most people have to be, in most places, a citizen of that location in order to vote, You will also in many cases see naturalization status, sometimes down to the date, place, and court in which they naturalized, which can lead you to additional information. You can discover the occupation, you can learn about property ownership and payment of taxes and race, and all of those pieces of information don't just help establish the identity of the individual you're looking for, but it also helps you differentiate between multiple individuals of the same name in the same time in the same place. These are really rich records. I hope you will dive into them and start discovering more about your own ancestry. If you have questions as you look at them, please feel free to leave them here in the comments on YouTube. I do monitor those and will respond as necessary. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.